Well, would you grab a Bible? We are in the book of Psalms. Tonight we are going to cover Psalm 55. So if you've already made your way there or you're making your way there, long that God would just take His word and communicate it to you. So as always, there are Bibles around you. You need one. If you need one, you don't have one, use one of those so that through the word of God, God would speak to you. So we've taken moments just to cast our cares before God. Let's take one more moment before we even go into the text just to ask that God would speak to us. I think there's a needed humility in so doing, that we would just recognize we need God to open up His word to us. And so I'm just going to lead you in prayer, but I'm hoping you would be praying as well that God would speak to you tonight in His faithfulness by His word. Father, I think about your word. It is a light that shines in a dark place, you said. And indeed, that's true. Lord, so many things that bring in darkness, and yet here is your word that you said would bring light. Lord, would you lighten our path? Would you speak to us? Would you give us hearts to hear and respond? Would you take your word and just cause it to penetrate our hearts and to bear fruit in our lives? I'm asking for that for me and for all of us here this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Do you ever feel like running away? You know what I mean, right? Just that place, that emotion where all of a sudden you just feel like you want to escape. Now, maybe I could honestly ask that question differently. Where do you want to go when you feel like you want to escape? I mean, I think I can say that almost without doubt, that probably all of us have had those feelings. For some of us, different things. It's like, yeah, I'm just going to move to Alaska. I'm just going to go up in the middle of nowhere. That's what I'm going to do. And then somebody else is like, no, I'm going to Hawaii. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to like a beach. And somebody else is like, no, I'm just going to go live off the grid somewhere. I mean, nobody's going to be able to get a hold of me. I mean, I don't know where it is, but I think you have those days. I think there are days, and I'm not talking about just the kind of fun days where you're just dreaming of maybe doing something different, but the kind of days where you feel like you're done, where you just want to get away, where life itself feels like it's pressing in on you. And there's something about you that if you could run away, you would. That's exactly how David feels when he writes this psalm. In fact, why don't you scan down to it just for a moment. Notice how he says it in verse 6 and 7. He said, so I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Indeed, I would wander far off. I would remain in the wilderness. David just is thinking about it. I wish if I could just run away, if I could fly like wings like a dove, that's what I would do right now. That's what David is feeling. And in this moment, we find incredible help because like nothing else in this world, God's word has a way of penetrating and speaking life to us. It is altogether possible that you've had one of those days, that today is one of those days, or you've had one this week where you have felt like this, where you have just felt just encroached upon and life feels hard and there's this almost escapist, kind of just mentality that kind of creeps up on you. Maybe it's not where you are right now, but it'll probably come. I will be honest enough to admit it's not altogether uncommon in my life, where it's just like, you know what, that's exactly what I feel like doing. I just feel like, yeah, if I gave just vent to that, that's where I would go. And yet I find incredible help in psalms like this that speak into those realities and help us to see both the normalcy of it, but also help in it. So I'm hoping God would meet you in that. Well, before we go in there, you might just notice with me the inscription that begins the psalm. Psalm 55, it says there at the beginning, to the chief musician, again, most likely the worship leader, with stringed instruments, a contemplation of David. We've had a number of psalms in the last number of weeks that they've been called this, a contemplation, just a thinking and a wrestling with this, and that's what David's dealing with. But would you note with me, David doesn't lock this psalm into a specific location in his life. Now, Bible students wrestle. They wonder maybe, is David's going to write about this psalm that maybe they know? And some would guess it was maybe a low point when his son betrays him and his friend Ahithophel turns against him. And that's a possibility. There are things that would lock into that and say, that sounds like this psalm could have been written then. But then there are other parts of it that doesn't sound like what David was going through at all. Doesn't sound like how he was processing. And so there is, kind of this debate among Bible students, but if I can be even more simple, if we needed to know, God would have told us. If the key to unlocking this psalm was understanding what David was going through, then it would have told us, because many of the psalms do that. Next week, as we go over the psalms, they're going to tell us exactly where David was when he wrote the psalms. Not this week. And so somehow, knowing when is not important. It's more knowing what. In fact, this is such an emotive psalm. It's one of those ones where you could just feel it. And I think there's something about just almost gazing into and feeling what David feels that maybe, again, will be helpful, or I'm hoping that it will be. I'm hoping that in one sense, instead of trying to figure out exactly what David was going through, you'll just be able to feel like what he was feeling, and you'll be able to say, yeah, I get that. I know days like that, because they're not altogether uncommon. And then to find that God would meet us in it. So that's where we want to go, as David begins to describe what we're just going to say it this way, in the first 14 verses, a very difficult season. Whatever it was, whatever David was facing, it was just very difficult, and he wants to describe it for us. Notice what he does in the first couple verses. He says, "Give ear to my prayer, O God. Do not hide yourself from my supplication. Attend to me and hear me. I am restless in my complaint, and I moan noisily." David describes it. He begins to describe just a desperation that he feels. He begins this psalm by saying that he feels desperate, so much so that he's just, God, would you please hear me? God, please hear me. In fact, he says it 4 times. 4 times he just begins the psalm by saying, God, give ear to my prayer. Don't hide yourself from me. Attend to me. I mean, like, pay attention. Hear me. I mean, if you can hear David's heart, he's just desperate. There is even a sense that maybe he just feels distant from God. One way or another, he just feels desperate that God would get through. I mean, it's the beginning of this where he's just saying, God, I'm desperate right now. I need your help. I need your response. God, I need you to hear me, and it's a good beginning. And then he describes it this way. He says, I am restless in my complaint, and I moan noisily. I think those are amazing descriptions. I mean, he just says, I'm restless. I'm restless in my complaint. I moan noisily. And again, if you can, instead of just trying to process this through in a thinking way, I just want you to feel it. He just says, I'm restless. You ever been restless? When something's going on wrong in life and you're antsy, you just can't seem to rest. You lay down at bed at night and your mind just runs 10,000 miles an hour. You're just restless. In fact, you literally moan noisily. You know what I mean, right? Nobody raise your hands, but you probably have a spouse that you know what this is like, right? I mean, you're there and you're in the house for some of you and you just hear them. All of a sudden they're in the other room and they're just like, and you're like, what's going on in there? I mean, what are you doing? It's like, I don't know. I'm just having a hard day. I'm just moaning noisily, okay? That's what I'm just doing. I'm just sighing. I just the weight of it kind of pulls. And David says, that's what I'm doing. I feel like I'm groaning and I'm moaning and I'm anxious and I'm worried. And he says, I'm going through a lot of these things, and it's how he's responding to it. It's how he feels. And he begins to tell us why. And it begins with really feeling that he's oppressed, that there are things happening around his life that cause him to be that way. Notice again his description. He says, because, I'm moaning noisily, because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they bring down trouble upon me, in wrath they hate me. So again, he just begins to put words to how he's feeling. He says, it's as if there's a voice. There's a voice of the enemy. So certain that he just feels like he's being talked about. But for us, it's bigger than that. There's a voice that isn't just the voice of people. It's a voice of our adversary, the one who brings in condemnation. I just feel his voice, and I just feel this oppression. I mean, it says, I just feel as if it's squeezing me, as if it's just kind of that's what oppression is. It just feels like it's kind of wrapping itself around my life. He says it's just bringing it down upon me. It says, for they bring down trouble upon me. It's a pretty interesting Hebrew phrase because it has the idea of just crashing down on his life, just almost cascading. It says that just weight upon weight, just oppression upon oppression. It's just rolling in waves just upon his life as he begins to describe it. And he just says, I feel hated. I feel hated. There is depth of emotion right here. There's a struggle that David's feeling, and they're hard to put into words. I just want to tell you they're huge things. To feel that voice, to feel that there's stuff that others are and our enemy is saying, to feel oppressed, to feel that life is cascading down, to feel hatred. Now, that's no minor thing, if I can just say it this way. Life can be summed up in loving God and loving people. It's what you're made for. You're made for that, and so hatred becomes almost the opposite of that, almost one of the most toxic of things, to feel just that animosity and that hatred. And David feels it. It's as if whatever's happening in his life, whatever situation's taking place of, he just feels that there are things happening around his life. There are situations that are pressing and cascading and bringing in trouble and bringing in anxiety. And that's just the beginning. Because it's not just being oppressed from without. It's feeling depressed within. David lets us know it's not just the stuff that's happening out there. It's not just what other people are doing. He's struggling in his own heart. And again, he just says it so well. Verse 4. My heart is severely pained within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me. Again, the poetry of it, the descriptions, they're just so poignant. I wish I could say them better. There's a sense he just said, my heart hurts. My heart is pained. There's just something about it when you feel inside you that just, you feel wounded and hurt, and there's nothing better than to say, and someone can say, what is it? You have a broken bone, are you sick? It's like, no, I'm hurting on the inside. My heart hurts. I feel like I'm struggling on something deeply it's not on the outside of this. He says, I just feel terrors. I just there, and all of a sudden it just scares me. I just feel like these things kind of roll over me. I have this place where fearfulness just grips me, where I find just fears just mounting up, and fears of what I'm facing and what I might go through and how that's going to work. He says, literally, I feel like I'm trembling. I feel like I'm trembling. And then he says, I just have this sense of horror. Again, as he looks upon this, he says, horror has overwhelmed me. And again, it's a fascinating word because it's not used much in the Bible. In fact, in some translations, it's just translated darkness. That's maybe a better way to describe it. It just feels like darkness is encompassing me. I feel this horror. I feel this encompassing. And he just says, as he sums it up, he says, I just feel overwhelmed. All of these are emotional just descriptions of how he feels, not because of what somebody else is doing, but inside. And they just do so well. Adam Clark said it this way. He says, no man ever described a wounded heart like David. David does an incredible job of just giving us a window, biblically, the Holy Spirit working through him, so we can look and say, yeah, I know what that feels like. I'm just thinking maybe for you, like me, maybe you've had seasons like this. Again, maybe it's today. Maybe it's been this week, and you're like, I couldn't have used those words. I'm just not that poetic. I'm not that, but that's a pretty good description. That's a pretty good description for what I was feeling and the weight of these things, just to feel this heart pain, to be afraid, trembling, terrors, to feel this darkness pressing in to where I just feel overwhelmed. It just feels too much. It just feels like I can't do this. I'm just not sure I can make it through this. I'm just not sure how I can process this. And that's what David's feeling. David, for whatever's happening in the midst of this, he's struggling, and he's just telling us, this is my heart. This is where I am. And it's a wonderful thing to gaze upon this and recognize, in one sense, here's this man, a man after God's own heart, the sweet psalmist of Israel, one of the ones that was just so close to God, and yet he can struggle in such incredible ways. As he lays all this out in this oppression, this depression that he's facing, he comes to that place where we began, where he just says, I just want to run away. That's what I want to do. I mean, because whatever's this oppression that's happening outside, whatever the depression is on the inside, he says, so I said, I mean, this is what I said to myself, having this kind of conversation with myself. Oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Indeed, I would wander far off and remain in the wilderness. Again, I'm just going to put some of the words on the screen if it's helpful. He says, you know what I would do? I'd run away. I would fly away. Right now, you know what I want to do is I want out of this. I want to escape. I mean, what I would do right now is I feel like this. He says, I would run away and I would just rest. I would just get away from the weight of this, away from this, and I would just wander. I mean, kind of without any concern, without anything there. And he says, I wouldn't come back. That's what I want to do. I just want to go and run away and never, ever come back. I mean, that's what he's feeling right now. And it's an amazing thing, again, to understand and just to step into this and go, okay, that's incredible. And maybe, again, for some of you, you knew that this wasn't that uncommon, but maybe for somebody here this evening, you're like, I didn't know anybody else. I mean, we don't have these kind of conversations usually. I mean, you don't go up to somebody and say, you know, here's how I feel. I'm totally overwhelmed. I feel incredibly oppressed and depressed, and I just want to quit. I just want to run away. That's what I want to do. And you'll be like, I don't even know what to say to that. That's what David's feeling. And he gives us one of these moments where he just says that Hebrew word Selah at the end of verse 7, which has the idea of, would you just let that soak in for a moment? It's probably a musical and a spiritual and a thought pause, where when you get to that place in the psalm, it means before you go and read the next verse, would you just soak in that for a second? So I'm just going to give you just a second. I just want you to think about it. I just want you to think about what David's saying. If you want to just think about it for a moment, if you want to read it quietly, just take a moment and just Selah. Just let this soak for a second. I'm just going to read it all up to that point one more time. Give ear to my prayer, O God. Do not hide yourself from my supplication. Attend to me and hear me. I am restless in my complaint, and I moan noisily because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they bring down trouble upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is severely pained within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me. So I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Indeed, I would wander far off, and I would remain in the wilderness. Selah. David just says, that's what I want to do. And as he comes back to it after the Selah, he just adds to it this in verse 8. He says, I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and from the tempest. I mean, that's what I would do. If I did whatever I felt like, that's what I would do. But the way that he's saying it, even in that verse, I think is clear, but maybe worth saying. He doesn't. He doesn't. I mean, there's a part of this where he says, this is what I feel like doing, but David's not doing that. Again, it might just be helpful to recognize that good people, godly people feel this way at times. Sometimes they literally run. Elijah did. Elijah had one of those days, and he literally ran away. But most of the time we don't. Most of the time you feel this, you have this kind of emotional thought, and you think, if I could board a plane today, I would be over in wherever, but you don't. But it's how you feel. It's how David describes it. Alexander McLaren said it this way. He says, so the psalmist's wish was but a wish. And he, like the rest of us, had to stand his post or be tied to a stake and let enemy and storms do their worst. He says, it was just a wish. It's not like he's really going to quit. He's not really running away. He really had to stay. He really had to stay. And just to stick it through and think, okay, how do I do that? How do I face that? And that's beginning to what he wants us to understand. Yet before that, he helps us just understand it went a little bit deeper. There in verses 9, 10, and 11, he tells us that not only is he struggling with kind of external things, not only his heart, but at the same moment, it just opened up his whole scope into the brokenness that's all around him. Again, the words are great. I'll just read it kind of quickly. He says, destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues. For I've seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go around on its walls. Iniquity and trouble are also in the midst of it. Destruction is in its midst, and oppression and deceit do not depart from its streets. So David is feeling oppressed because of some things that are happening in his life. He's feeling depressed because of some things that are internally. And then he just widens it. It's like everywhere out there. Like in our streets right now, it is so broken. I mean, like no matter where I go, no matter where I am, there's brokenness in our world. And there's something about just feeling that you live in a broken world. That you live in a place where he says, day and night they go around on its walls as if it's marching around the entire city. Iniquity and trouble are in its midst, destruction in its midst, oppression and deceits. They're just part of this brokenness that he has, and in one sense, it's part of the weight that he's feeling. But then he takes us to one of the causes. He lets us know that one of the things that's triggered all of this in his life is he's been betrayed. He's been betrayed by a friend. Let's just read it. Verse 12. For it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me, who has exalted himself against me. Then I could hide from him. But it was you, a man my equal, my companion and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together, and we walked to the house of God in the throng. David had a friend turn on him. Now, again, we could guess maybe it's Ahithophel, maybe it's some of those things, but it's not a perfect fit, and we probably would be mistaken just to lock it into that one place. Certainly, there's probably other places that happened, but it was probably one of the causes. This was probably, if you will, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, when he was betrayed, it probably cascaded all these other things, because that's how it sometimes happens. That when something goes wrong, then all of a sudden everything else just begins to crash around you, where you're like, the whole world feels like it's falling apart. And one of the deepest hurts in life is to be betrayed. It's one thing to have people not like you. It's one thing to have somebody say something mean about you or do something unkind, and not to have a relationship with that person, but to have them be close. To have them be where he says, it's not an enemy. It's not someone that we were always hated each other. He says it was somebody that he felt like was his equal, that they could do life together in many ways. It was their companion and his acquaintance. He says, we talked together. We had sweet counsel. We went to church together, if you will. We went and sought God's counsel together. And then it was you. It was you. I don't know if you feel that. I can't say for certain that everybody in this room has had somebody betray you, but most of you have. Most of us will. Sometimes we forget what it's even like, and that's maybe gracious in the midst of it, but there are a few things so painful. To have somebody that you believed in, they were close to you, you did life together, and then they became an enemy to you. Again, I'm not trying to stir things up or to cause problems, but just to say honestly, for some of you here tonight, it was a spouse. It was somebody that you opened up your life to. You shared everything with them. You told them your deepest fears and your struggles, and somehow you thought that would just pull your life together, and yet for some of you, you've been betrayed. I wish it never happened. I wish divorce was never a reality, but I know it's happened for some of you. And some of you understand there are a few things like that betrayal. To have somebody that you trusted and believed in and had confidence in, and then to have them turn on you. It's incredibly hard. For some of you, it was a coworker. For some of you, it was somebody maybe even in ministry that you did things together and you thought, well, this is great. We're going to do this for a long time. For some of you, it was a best friend, and you thought, we're always going to be best friends. We're always going to do life together. I mean, you imagined what it was like to grow old together. And then it happened. They became your enemy. They turned on you. They talked about you behind your back. They did things, and there's just something about that betrayal that is just devastating. And again, I'm not trying to stir that up in your life, but I'm just wanting you to know that's what David's feeling. David's like, this is so hard. This is so hard. One of the amazing things as we think about this is, in one sense, the compassion that we can find, because David felt it, others felt it, and maybe again you felt it, and to be here to find that you're not alone in that becomes amazing. But there's a greater window than that. Oh, you might already know. Some of your brains have already gone there. You're like, I know somebody else who was betrayed, and that was my Savior. I mean, perhaps one of the greatest betrayals in human history. To find Jesus come and the Son of God, the greatest of anybody ever, perfect, never does anything wrong, lives a perfect life, and then he comes. And he raises up followers, and he picks 12 of them. And they do life together, day and night. They live together. They do ministry together for 3.5 years. Jesus, the Son of God, invests himself into these 12, and then he's betrayed. One of those turns from him, and Jesus talks about it that night before he goes to the cross, and he's telling his disciples, he answered, he said, he who dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me. I mean, one of you guys who are doing life with me, that we eat together, we fellowship, and we are as close as it can be, one of you are going to betray me. And that's what happened. That night, Judas would come, and with a detachment of troops, and literally his plan of attack was to do it so deceitfully. He comes and tells them, the one that I kiss is going to be the one you arrest. And Jesus confronts him. He says, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? I mean, what incredible betrayal, what incredible hurt. And I want to tell you, there's an incredible window here. I mean, it's not that this whole psalm is messianic. It's not that everything in this psalm is necessarily a picture of Christ, but certainly there's parts of it that draw us there. And I just want to tell you, there's something about recognizing that Jesus knows. That's what Hebrews tells us. It says we don't have a high priest that can't, sympathize with us. And that he can go, I know what that feels like. I know what you feel. Come to me, cast all your cares on me, because I know what it is to be betrayed. I just want to tell you that's an incredible thing, and David needed that, and maybe you need it here tonight, just to recognize that that's an incredibly difficult place. So that's the picture of David's struggle. That's the difficult season that David's in. It's betrayal. In a broken world, he's feeling oppressed, depressed, the whole thing, the blackness that comes into it. He's telling us this is what he's facing. This is how it describes where he is. And again, there's just something powerful about knowing that godly people can feel this way sometimes. But he takes that difficult season and he gives us a prescription of prayer, of how he deals with this, and he's kind of been doing that throughout the whole psalm, but he makes it very, very specific as he thinks about these things, and he begins just to highlight it in a few ways. Verse 15, he says it this way, let death seize them. Let them go down alive into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. It's as if he looks at those who are hurting and betraying him, and he says, you know what? Let death have its way with that. Let hell become, in many ways, it's just full, just place where it's going. Now, this sounds really, really, some of you are like, is that actually what we're supposed to say? I mean, understand this. David's not wishing this. He's not, saying, well, I'm just praying you go to hell. That's not what he's saying. I mean, honestly, it's never meant to be our heart. He's going to talk about that they are not repenting in a moment. So there is a definite desire for repentance. There is a sense that maybe you've had somebody betray you, and surely one of the great things we would long for is I'd love to see that person turn around. I'd love to see that person get right with God. I'd love to see him turn from their sin. But if they don't, David states it this way, and it's not so much a cause this, but just recognizing where that road's going. Let it happen. I mean, they're on a road. That road's going to lead to God's judgment. The road they're on, that's a road towards hell. That's where they're on. That's the path that they're going on. That's where he looks at our broken world and he looks at these things that are happening there, and he just says, let that happen. Let them go down to hell. Their wickedness is in their dwellings. That's what's causing it, and that's where this is going to go. It doesn't always look like it today. People sometimes seem to get away with things, but they're not always going to get away with things. There is a God, and there is a judgment. And David just thinks about that. And that's not necessarily, that could be a hopeful thing of saying, God, you're going to deal with that. You're going to judge them. But then he turns to his own place, and he says it this way in verse 16. But as for me, I mean, that's what God's going to do. God's going to deal with them. God's going to judge them. That's not my job. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening, morning, and noon, I will pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He's redeemed my soul in the place from battle and that was against me, for there were many against me. David says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pray. That's what I do. You know what I do when I have one of those hard days, David says? When I feel oppressed, when I feel like running away, when I feel all of those things, you know what I do? He says, I'm going to pray. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to talk to God. I'm going to ask for his help. I'm going to seek his place. In fact, he says, you know what I'm doing? I'm going to do it evening, and then I'm going to do it again in the morning, and then I'm going to do it again at noon. Now, there's a wonderful part about this that is just so much continuous that there's the idea that I'm just keep praying. But if you can also say it this way, sometimes it takes continual prayer. It's the kind of thing that if you're struggling right now, if you had a hard day, if somebody has betrayed you, there's like one of these moments where you go and you tell God about it and you give it to him, and you're like, I'm going to give it to him tonight. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask God for help, and I'm going to say, God, give this to you, and I'm going to go to bed. And you wake up in the morning, and you know what? You have to do it again. Yeah. God, I'm going to give it to you again. it kind of got right back on my shoulders. Don't even know how that happened. So God, I'm just going to give it to you again. I'm going to say, God, here it is again. I'm just saying, God, this is yours. And they're going to be like, okay, I did it. We're all done. And you know what I'm going to have to do again? Middle of the day. It's back on there again. I got to do it again. I got to keep giving this. And there's something about just the reality of what David says that is so helpful. Again, just to know this is not necessarily a one-shot fix. Prayer is wonderful and gracious, and it doesn't mean that we just pray for something one time and it's done. There is a place where prayers can become repetitious and bad. He talks about that in Matthew 6, where he told us not to pray repetitiously. But don't misunderstand that. That was against treating prayer like a mantra, like you would say, hey, if I say a prayer 47 times, that it's going to have power. There are people that treat God that way, and that's not God. But it is never a burden to God when you're bothered by something and you need to pray about it again. And yeah, God, I talked to you about it this morning. I need to talk about it again. And God is calling us to cast our cares on him, and to keep casting our cares, and to keep casting our cares, and to keep casting our cares, and to keep casting our cares. David says, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. God's going to judge them. God will deal with them. But you know what I do? I want to pray. I'm going to pray. And then he says something quite powerful. He says, he has redeemed my soul in peace from the battle that was against me. And it's very, very possible that David is writing this psalm after obtaining that peace. That he's telling us, I had a really bad day and I prayed and God gave me peace. That could be very, very helpful. But it's actually read in such a way that it could also be a confident statement when you're in that. So you know what God's going to do? He's going to rescue me, guaranteed. I know he's going to be the one that's going to give me peace. Even though I'm not feeling right now, there's a confidence that I'm going to pray, and you know what? God answers prayer. I'm going to pray, and he's going to be my rescue. He's going to be my help. that I know that this is going to work for good, and I'm going to trust into that. And in many ways, that becomes part of the point of this, that we'd say, hey, that's what I'm going to do. Now, before we go past that, can I just pause and say how needed that is? How needed that is, that we would be those who would walk into that and call upon him and find his strength. That's what David's doing, and David's just looking on all that is and saying, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find that help. And then he turns back again to where these other people are. He says in verse 19, he says, God will hear, and he will afflict them, even he who abides from of old. He says, you know what's going to happen? I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to find his help in my life. I'm going to find his help to be my Redeemer. And you know what? He's going to afflict them. He'll be my defender. He's going to be the one that deals with righteousness and justice. And once more, he just tosses in a Selah moment, as if to say, hey, you just need to hear that. You just need to hear that. So again, I'm just going to give you a second. Just whatever that looks like, reading the verses again or just thinking about it. I just want you to hear that he's going to say, okay, I'm going to pray. He's going to deliver me, and God will take care of afflicting the other people. He will be the judge and not me. Verse 16 again. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon, I will pray and cry aloud. He shall hear my voice. He has redeemed my soul in peace from the battle that was against me. For there were many against me. God will hear and afflict them, even he who abides from of old. Selah. He says that God's going to deal with them. God's going to do this because they don't repent. He says because they do not change. Therefore, they do not fear God. This is because in many ways he's looking on these who have heard and are doing. He says they're not turning to God. They're not turning from their sin. They're not turning, back to God. And they don't fear God. And so David's able to look and say, that's really why I can look and say that's where they stand. They're on a road that's a hell-bent road. And David's able to say, okay, I'm going to gaze upon that and say, God, you're going to deal with this. Now, as David is processing that, he comes back to one of his big struggles, and he just thinks about his betrayal. And he just puts it in words without, huge explanations, but it just lets us know that he's still struggling with being betrayed. Verse 20 says, he, speaking of his betrayer, has put forth his hands against those who were at peace with him. He has broken his covenant. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, but they were drawn swords. Again, it's just very poetic. It's very powerful. He looks at somebody who had made a covenant with him, had committed to do life with him, and he says they broke it. And they did it so deceptively. They sounded so sincere. It's like smoother than oil. They sounded this place where they're smoother than butter and softer than oil. But he said, boy, underneath those words, they were cruel. They had swords waiting. Underneath their supposed niceties, boy, they were stabbing. And David just thinking how hard that was for him. I'm just telling you. David's just letting us know that, hey, this was hard for me. This was a struggle for me. This was difficult in the midst of it. This was something that he faced that was altogether a hard thing for him to walk through. And somehow, again, it's just helpful. It's just helpful for us to understand that we're not the only ones that go through those days, that there are days that we find that. And so from that, David now wants to speak directly to you. Up to this point, the psalm has been biographical. David has been honest. He's told us, my heart was pained. I'm moaning noisily. I feel like running away. I feel like these things are against me. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray. So it's been a very autobiographical. David's been talking about his struggles, but having learned what he's learned and done what he's done, he now speaks directly to you and I as the readers, as those who would hear what he has to say. And he simply says it this way. Verse 22, cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. He shall never permit the righteous to be moved. But you, God, shall bring them down to the pit of destruction. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men shall not live out half their days. But I will trust in you. David looks and just says, here's what you should do. You should give that to God. You should cast your burdens on the Lord. You should do that. His encouragement to you is to do that. And I think about even the quote that we were referring to earlier in our time of prayer there in Peter, where it tells us the same thing, where it says, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. I mean, trust him with it. He's God. Casting all your care on him because he cares about you. He says, you should do this. You should do this. You should cast your cares. You should cast your burden on him. And can I just say it again? We just need to hear it. Would to God that this was like a no-brainer, that we'd say, of course. I mean, what else do you do when you're having a bad day? You talk to God about it. But I wish that was really as common as that. The weird thing is that sometimes when we have a bad day and we have a bad season, we pull back from God too. The one who would be our help in those difficult seasons, the one that, David said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pray. I'll pray in the night, and I'll pray again in the morning, I'll pray again in the afternoon. I'm just going to, that's how I'm going to handle this. And David is just looking at you, and he's looking at me, and he's telling us, why would you not give him what you're struggling with? If there's a weight on your life right now, if there's something that's happening in your world that's hurtful, why would you not cast it on God? Why would you, leave just carrying your own weights and your own struggles when you could give it to God? I mean, he's inviting us to give it to him. David says not only would he do that, he says if we would do that, he would sustain us. He would be that one that would help us make it through. He would be the one that would carry us. In a few minutes, we're going to get towards our close, and we're going to sing from that hymn that, I need you, Lord. I need every hour. I need you. And I think about how incredible just that is. Just this place of just saying, God, I need your help. I need help to make it through the day. I can't do this on my own, and I need you to sustain me. And David says, if you would just give him your cares, he would sustain you. And more than that, he will never permit the righteous to be moved. He will always be our defense. This is a Romans 8:28 verse just said differently. All things work together for good to those who love God. He is never going to lose. He is always going to rescue. He's always going to turn the things in our life that are going badly, he's always going to turn it for good. He never loses. There's not ever going to be a place that God said, well, that was a loss in your life. And he's like, I can fix that. I will not let that be something that I can't, sustain you, lock it down, do good in your life. I will never permit that to happen. So if that's the case, why would we not give it to him? Why would we be like, well, it just seems like a big deal to give to God. It seems like hard to give up to him. It's like, no, give him everything. And as David is doing this, and again, he's exhorting you, he's exhorting me, he closes it by turning it back to God one more time and just speaking very directly to God, not just about God and who God is, but speaking very directly to God. He says, but you, O God, shall bring them down to the pit of destruction. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men shall not live out half their days. God, you're going to deal with this. God, you're going to be the one that deals with sin in our world. People that seem like they're getting away with things are not going to get away with it. God, you're that one. Now, again, that might sound harsh, but it's not. It would be harsh if you were like, God, I'll do it. I'll bring down the wicked. And he's like, God, that's your job, but you're going to do it. And then he ends it with just this simple place of saying, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to trust you. I'll trust in the Lord. I'm going to take all that this is, and I'm going to take all that this is in the midst of this and say, God, I'm going to take this and just say, God, I trust you. What an incredible place that is in the midst of difficult days. in places where you feel oppressed and depressed and you feel like running away and you feel like the whole world is going against you and you just feel, I mean, what an incredible place it is to turn that to God and say, God, I'm going to trust you. At the end of this and in the middle of this, you know what I'm going to say? I know that you're good. I know that you're going to fix things. I know that you're going to deal with sin. I know that things are going to be made right. And as for me, I'm just going to trust you. I think about how amazing that is. And again, I'm just giving it to you as an encouragement, not as a condemnation, but as a prescription that say, okay, this is what we get to do. This is what David is saying he did, where he found incredible hope. He found incredible, just a means of this, where he was going through a really difficult season. And he says, you know what I did? I prayed about it. And you should do it too. You should just turn it to God. Find God to be your help. Let him sustain you. Let him encourage you. Let him walk that through with you. So as we begin just to pull this to a close tonight, I just want to put on the screen that just words from that one verse and put it on there even as a graphic where he's just saying, here's my encouragement to you. Hey, would you give your burdens to the Lord? Would you give your burdens to the Lord? Because if you do, he'll take care of you. He'll sustain you. He'll be that one that does that. And can I come back to something I was saying earlier tonight in our time of prayer? If you leave here tonight carrying your own burdens, there's something tragic about that. There's something, a sad miss that you would leave here just carrying the weight yourself, carrying the weight of whatever you're facing. When you can say, God, I'm just going to give this to you. I'm just going to trust you. I'm going to trust that you could work good in this. Doesn't mean you're not going to have to trust him again tomorrow morning. Doesn't mean you're not going to have to trust him again tomorrow afternoon. But to leave here giving it to him would become amazing. And it's one of those constant processes where we should do that. But if you could be altogether honest with yourself, we just don't always do it. I mean, I don't always. I mean, there's so many times where I feel like, it's like, I could even come into God's presence and carry the weight. And it's like, hi, God, this is really bothering me. I'm going to go home now. Like, I'm still going to carry the weight that I still have. I'm just going to continue just feeling the weight of it instead of saying, God, can I give this to you? Can I give you what I'm feeling? Can I give you what's waiting on me? Can I give you just my discouragement, my depression, my moaning noisily? Can I just say, God, I'm going to give it to you? It's an amazing place, and it's a hopeful place. So I'm just going to invite you to do that. Would you join me right now in prayer? And we'll close in worship, seeking to just enter into this evening. God, thank you for just opening up David's struggles. For me, I look on a psalm like this, and I'm amazed at how well said it is. Although it's tragic and hard and sad. But it just aptly describes some of those hard days. God, days that we moan noisily. Days where we feel like our heart is just hurting. And we feel like the world is dark. God, to go through those things and to feel betrayed and hurt. Those are real things. But exactly such things that you invite us to give to you. To give to you our burdens. To give to you our cares. God, if we don't do that tonight, then we are missing out on incredible help and hope. I would ask that you would give us the words that David said. That we could say, as for me, I'm going to pray. Maybe others won't. Maybe not everybody here this evening will turn over their cares to you. Wish we all would do that. But as for me, I want to do that. I want to give you the concerns, the cares, the worries, the fears. I'm going to cast my burdens upon you, Lord, just knowing that you care about me. And I want to ask that you would sustain me. I want to ask that you would just secure and work it all together for good. Lord, just as we do that this evening, would you meet us as we just surrender this to you in a fresh way? In Jesus' name.